If ifs and buts were candy and nuts, it'd be Christmas all year round. That saying has stuck with me since Jerry Lawler used it on a previous WWE video game. But it's true, because when it comes to the world of wrestling, there are things that happen because something else preceded it and caused it to happen. So here on today's old school edition of the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast, we dive into the biggest what ifs in the world of professional wrestling. Let's not waste any more time. Let's get right to it. The bomb drops now. Hello and welcome to this old school edition of the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast, the show that is for the fans, by the fans. I am your phenomenal host, Mr. Podcasting, Chris Belcher. You can follow me at Chris Belcher24 on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The show is at PBW Podcast on all the social media platforms. You can find our show on Anchor, on Spotify, on Apple Podcast, wherever you find your audio shows. And if you're watching our smiling faces on video, you're watching on YouTube. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Give us a comment, give us a review. We read all those things and we really appreciate it. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see that I am not alone in my video here. I am joined by a very special guest, my dad, making his third appearance on this season of the podcast. Billy Belcher, how are you?
I'm fine.
You good?
I'm not old school. I'm ancient school.
You're ancient school. That's right. I forgot. You're ancient school. And joining us on his, I think, first edition of the old school version of the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast, Mr. Andy, your host of the Shandy Show. You're cracking up over there, Andy.
I love it. I love it. I love the between your intro and your dad saying he's not old school, ancient school. I love it. I picked the perfect episode to come on. This is amazing.
Oh, it's so good, man. It's going to be a blast talking about the biggest what ifs in professional wrestling. And we could not do this episode without shouting out to SportsWire Radio, formerly Sportnarium Radio. It was about, I think it was about a month ago. There was a discussion on Twitter that I was tagged in that one of the other shows, and forgive me, I forget the other show that was doing this as a topic, but they actually tweeted out and said, okay, we're going live in an hour talking about the biggest what ifs in wrestling. And they named a couple. And then I got tagged in the reply and said, hey, what do you think? Well, then as the discussion kind of went on, I was like, man, this would be a perfect podcast for us. So here we are. Shout out to those guys on SportsWire. You can catch us there every Monday and Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Make sure you show love to Tom and the crew over there. They've done a lot to support us, and we can't thank them enough. But let's get right into it. I tell you, like I said in the intro, Dad, there are so many things that have happened in the wrestling business that would not have happened if something else hadn't happened. Good, bad, indifferent. Something else had to happen. So many happy accidents, like the Montreal Screwjob, for example. We're not going to dive into that one, but if the Montreal Screwjob doesn't happen, the Attitude Era arguably doesn't happen.
No.
You know, wrestling is not nearly as big as it is.
No, I agree.
Andy,
totally agree.
Andy, another one that we're not going to talk about is, and the reason we're not going to talk about these is because they are very common. They've been run into the ground. Of course, I'm talking about, Andy, what if Hulk Hogan wasn't the third man? You know, that's arguably one of the biggest questions in wrestling history, because he wasn't supposed to be the original one because they didn't think he would do it. But you talk about changing the game.
Yeah.
Hulk Hogan wasn't the third man. You know, what would WCW be? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was that. This whole concept is really cool to me too, because especially right now on Disney Plus, Marvel is doing their version of this on a TV show of like, what if, what if the first Captain America movie was about the woman Peggy Carter instead of Steve Rogers? And so when you texted me about this idea, I was like, this is perfect timing for all of this. And like you said, the Montreal Screwjob and Hogan, and there are a couple others, probably the ones that I have here too, which, this is the old school version, and my old school version is like 7 years ago, kind of what I'm covering. So you're going to have to forgive me on that because I am a late bloomer to wrestling. But
Listen.
I love this concept.
You are a young buck. Okay,
I am.
Let's just throw it out there.
I am.
Feel sorry for you.
Before we dive totally into this, Dad, you had texted me when Jared and I recorded. Shout out to Jared who couldn't be on the show with us tonight because this would have been a fearsome foursome if he would have been on talking about all of this.
Oh, yeah.
But when Jared and I did our NWO episode, we really dove into Hogan being the third man. By the way, you can catch that in our archives. Go back and check that out. 25 years of the NWO. Jared and I really go into the Hogan third man concept. But you had texted me and said you had a lot of thoughts about the NWO and all that kind of stuff. Share a little bit about Hogan and the third man and your thoughts.
Well, I don't think Sting would have never been the third man. I don't think he was always good in WCW, and he wouldn't turn bad. I just don't see that. The main thing you think about that is, if Sting's not in, opposite of the NWO, there is no NWO.
Right.
Hall and Nash, and reluctantly I'll say Hogan, made the NWO.
Well, you can't have a good antagonist without a good protagonist.
You got a bad group, you got to have a good guy.
Yeah. You couldn't have, the NWO wouldn't be as successful as it was without Sting and vice versa, because there always had to be that one overarching story of what if these two finally collided, would it finally stop the NWO or, what have you?
Well, Andy, one name they never did give Sting, and me and you, because I'm a Marvel Mark. I don't know if Chris has ever told you. I've seen I'm a Marvel Mark.
Good.
Sting is really an Avenger.
Yeah.
He was probably the first Avenger.
That's true. That's true.
But no, where Captain America was. But another point I wanted to make out, and it goes back to the show we're doing today, the what ifs. What if Hall and Nash doesn't come?
Yeah, that's an easy one too.
That's the easiest one because they don't come. Hogan don't join. They don't have that. It's just,
That's it.
They're the main clogs.
Yep, they really are. That's for sure. And I have one point that's kind of similar to that, and we'll get into that possibly in just a little bit if we head down that direction. Well, I tell you what, no, let's just start there because I think that's a fun one. So Hall and Nash go over to WCW for more money and less dates. And who wouldn't do that? You're not guaranteed a contract in the WWF at the time. WCW, they were offering them bukus of money for way less dates. And half the dates that they were required for, they didn't show up for anyway, and they didn't get punished for it. So Hall and Nash are the big invasion guys that come over. It really makes it seem like an invasion angle, which is a great concept. And you had to have a WWF guy be the third guy. I think that's widely established. And Hogan was that guy. So let's say later on, 1996, WCW is really elevating. I mean, it's just the sky's the limit for those guys. And the WWF is really kind of plateauing. They had Shawn Michaels running the ship over there, Triple H trying to help him out. You hadn't had the rise of Stone Cold Steve Austin yet. You still had the Undertaker, but Shawn and the Undertaker, who were they going to face? They were the good guys. Vader wasn't really working out. Yokozuna was at the end of his career. Owen Hart, you could have done that. But all that to say, WWF was really declining. And there's a lot of rumors floating around that Shawn Michaels wanted to go to WCW. So my first what if, Andy, I'll throw to you first. What if in 1996, Shawn Michaels joins his buddies in WCW? What happens there?
I think obviously, I think the entire wrestling landscape would have changed drastically if that would have happened. Because I think we would have seen WWF at the time going into very quickly fail-safe mode, trying to pull everything out of the book because, they've obviously, like you said, Hall and Nash going over was a big blow, but having somebody like Shawn Michaels leave to go over there to be with them probably would have led to somebody like Triple H probably doing the same thing at some point.
Yep.
So if you had all four back together again, and if you had that entire concept happening, we probably would still have a WCW around right now. And we may not have a WWF right now. I think that would have completely changed the landscape of pro wrestling at that time.
And not to steal your thunder, Dad, if you had thought of this, but you have to think that Bret Hart would have been number one guy in WWF. There would have been really nobody else. The company would have been carried by Bret Hart. What do you think about that?
Well, if those 4 guys come, like Andy says, and Bret stays, and then Hogan, he don't turn bad if those 4 guys come.
Exactly.
Because he wants to be the dude. He wants to be the main man, and he wouldn't be running the show. And Shawn would bring it in there and Triple H, and it'd be DX in the WCW.
Exactly.
And it would have been maybe a bit more popular. But
that could be true. Well, you got to think at that point, you would have had, since you don't have Hogan as a bad guy, you've got Hogan as a good guy. So you got to think the inevitable in 1996 would have been Hogan versus Shawn in 96 instead of 2005, which, I mean, I watched that match the other day. It's not as bad as everybody says, but it's fun. But Shawn and Hogan in 96.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the thing about it is, if those 4 had come, and Bischoff is a pretty lenient guy. He's not like Vince.
Right.
Vince says what I say goes, and that's the way it is.
Yeah.
So if those 4 guys come and they throw the DX in there and the NWO all together, Eric's going to let them do whatever they want.
That's exactly right.
He did it anyway.
Right.
And you got to also think, like, you could sell the match between Shawn Michaels and Hogan. You could also sell the match between Shawn Michaels and Sting.
Yep.
Like, that's a big time match. You could even do the thing that still baffles me to this day, that they never did this at WrestleMania. Like, you could have a proper Hogan versus Flair. You could have a proper Hogan or Flair versus Shawn at that time. Flair. You could have had a lot of fun with that roster.
Yep.
In WCW that WWF wouldn't have had the luxury to do. And I think with, the whole Bret Hart thing, I don't actually know if Vince would have made Bret the guy. I think he still would have tried to find somebody else or threw everything at the book at Hogan to try to get him to come back over.
I would say you're right there about Hogan. He would have tried even harder to get him to come, maybe even Savage. Try to get Savage to come back too. One of those two, most likely. Just something he's more comfortable with. Yeah. Something that he feels like he can compete with. That also leads you to the point of just kind of another what if, but if Shawn goes to WCW in 96, he most likely doesn't break his back in 1998. And we don't get Shawn retired for 4 years. Mm-hmm. And then we don't get the second run of Shawn Michaels in 2002, which I think is better than the first run. That's just me.
But if Shawn went over and he didn't hurt his back, and he wouldn't put himself into position to turn his life around. His life with those 4 guys together, his life might have been completely out of order.
Yep.
So all things happen for a reason.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Triple H has went on record, and it was on the A&E biography about Shawn Michaels. Again, we've covered that in our archives with Dad and with Jared. Go check out that episode. But on the Shawn Michaels biography, Triple H said he literally had to set alarms for every hour to go check on Shawn because he was in such a drug-induced state that he didn't know if he was going to stop breathing or not. Yeah. And that was in 97, 98, around the time Shawn broke his back, when he was really abusing painkillers and that kind of thing. So does that happen? Maybe if that doesn't happen, maybe he doesn't get in quite that bad of shape. But again, in 1995, he got really bad out of shape. Before he broke his back, he got beat up by 9 thugs in Syracuse. And it's the same thing. So Dad, you're right. Vicious cycle for Shawn in that scenario.
Yeah. And it's in the grand scheme of things, it's good that it happened the way it is. Shawn turned his life over to God, and his life has been so much better. And, he's, in my book, he's on Mount Rushmore. He's one of the 4. He's
number 1.
That's debatable, but that's fine.
That is a very big debate, a debate that we're not going to have on this podcast. All right, Andy, I'm going to throw to you for a what if. What do you think? Again, for those of you out there who are listening, we're not covering the basic what ifs. So I asked both of these guys to just dive in and come up with something that we could fantasy book, something we could really have fun and talk about. So Andy, give me a what if.
Well, mine is kind of very much based off of what happened this past week on AEW with CM Punk, but I've kind of taken a different route because my first one was like, what if Punk never left WWE? But I kind of changed it to, what if the main event of WrestleMania 29 was a triple threat between The Rock, Cena, and Punk? How much would that have changed? Because to me, you could have had that match a match that like diehard wrestling fans would want to see. Also, like mainstream fans that don't watch the product that much, it's a match they still want to see because Cena and The Rock are in it. So you could still have Cena win. You could still have Punk in the WrestleMania main event, which more than likely would have kept him around at least a little bit longer.
Right.
So to me, that's like one of the biggest what ifs of the modern era is like what if the triple threat, or what if the main event at WrestleMania 29 was a triple threat instead of a one-on-one that we've seen already last year?
Because Punk dropped the title to Rock at the Rumble before that, right? Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. So you got to think, Dad, you and I talked about this, and we sort of touched on this of course, we talked a lot about CM Punk on this past Thursday's episode, so make sure you go check that out. Last week when we aired our radio show with Tom Bryce on SportsWire Radio, the SummerSlam post show, we talked a lot about CM Punk there. And you and I have talked about how CM Punk is a great asset to professional wrestling, but he's not necessarily a great asset to a casual wrestling fan.
No.
He doesn't appeal. So, Andy, to your point, if he would have been in that triple threat match, Dad, imagine the mainstream appeal that he gets alongside of The Rock and Cena in the main event of WrestleMania.
Yeah, there's probably so many phases of fans, WWE, AEW, that, how can I say this? They're kind of their levels of like, hate, put up with. CM Punk, some people just doesn't like his style.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he's rubbed a lot of people the wrong way.
Right. He's, I don't know what he's like backstage. I mean, I've watched him wrestle. He's a good athlete. There's no doubt about that.
Yep.
It proved that. And then, because I watched the 9 minutes of when he returned the other night on AEW, and he was very vocal, and he was true to what he said.
Yep.
And I think, that would have been a grand thing, like you said, Andy. He's a great wrestler. But throwing all that in, you got that triple threat. Where's Stone Cold fit in all that?
Well, at that time, because that happened at WrestleMania 29.
Yeah.
And Austin was gone at that point. So, but that being said, that could lead to a necessary what if Austin doesn't break his neck.
Right.
In 2003.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry, he breaks his neck in 97. 2003, he's forced to retire. If he doesn't break his neck, maybe he's there for another 10 years. Mm-hmm. And maybe, Andy, we get the dream match that everybody still wants to see to this day, Austin and Punk.
Yeah. That to me is like one of the most, I don't want to say missed opportunity, because obviously there's nothing nobody could done about, Stone Cold's neck. So I think it's one of those, like, something that everybody's always going to want to see. It's kind of like a Shawn Michaels, AJ Styles match. It's something that we want to see. And, if you have WWE 2K, whatever, you're going to play that match at some point in your life.
Right.
And so to me, like, that would have been a great way if in this world, you could do that at WrestleMania 30 after you've already given Punk this main event with The Rock, with John Cena, given him such a massive boost that he kind of needed with the mainstream fans. Because, like, to me, if you have The Rock and Cena and you add Punk in there, everybody gets something that they want in the main event. You've got The Rock, who is the movie star that's going to get all the appeal from people that don't watch pro wrestling, don't watch WWE. They're going to watch because The Rock's in it. You have the WWE diehards who are in it for John Cena. And then you have, like, pro wrestling diehards, independent fans that are going to watch for Punk to be in the ring with both those guys. So, to me, it's just it's a perfect recipe to kind of keep Punk happy, but also, like, hey, we've got all this other stuff you can do as well.
Not to go down too far of a rabbit hole, but to speculate a little bit, because, Dad, you alluded to maybe CM Punk might not, at least in that time period, might not have been the easiest guy to get along with backstage. Do you think Punk would have been okay with losing that match? I know he's been very vocal about losing to Rock. Do you think he would have been okay, though, losing that match?
I do, because I think he just wanted to be in the main event. And that's all he talked about, was he never really got to, I know he went up against Undertaker, which the Undertaker is kind of like the main event, but to go on last at WrestleMania is like a massive, massive deal. And so I think he just wanted the opportunity to do that. So I don't know it necessarily. He probably wouldn't have been like the most thrilled about it, but I think it was a better case than, not losing your title to The Rock, not even really getting a rematch for it. And then, just kind of going back to, face the Undertaker and then kind of fall off after that. And I think that's kind of where his biggest struggle came from. So I think, if you could put him in this marquee match, which, by the way, the promos segments between all three guys would be through the roof. It'd be absolutely amazing.
You talk about mic work, man. Oh,
yeah, it would have been amazing to see those three guys, mic work together. But I think it would have just elevated Punk. Maybe he doesn't stay. Maybe he would still leave at some point. But I still think it buys you a few more months or a year with Punk in WWE.
Well, I think going up against the Undertaker at that WrestleMania is a solid backup plan.
Yeah,
and I would hope that would be something he would be satisfied with, especially because the streak was so established at that time.
Right.
And coming off the death of Paul Bearer and that whole angle, I mean, just brilliant stuff. So hopefully he was satisfied with that, and hopefully that didn't play in. I mean, I get what you're saying, not being able to main event WrestleMania, but at the same time, you said it. The Undertaker's a main event at WrestleMania, no matter where he's at on the card.
Yeah.
So, yeah. That being said, all right, Dad, let's go with one of your what ifs. I'm anxious to hear what you got.
Well, I don't want to be morbid here. And just talk about, but I will talk about someone that passed away way too young.
Okay.
And he just never did give his self an opportunity. And that's Reid Flair.
Ooh.
What if Reid Flair had not passed away?
Oh,
we may not have a Charlotte.
That's a good one. Because Andy, I don't know if you know about this or not, so I'm going to educate our listeners here. Charlotte has been very, very vocal since she had no interest in getting in the wrestling business.
Right.
Until Reid passed away, because Reid wanted to get into the wrestling business, and she wanted to do it for Reid.
Right.
So
exactly.
She just won the title at SummerSlam last week. 12-time champion. Arguably, I'm going to say arguably, the greatest women's wrestler in WWE history.
He has to say that, Andy, because I'm sitting there, because I'm a Charlotte Mark.
No, because Trish Stratus is better.
Oh my God.
There would not be a legacy for Charlotte Flair to have if it hadn't been for Trish Stratus. I believe that firmly. Okay. Anyway, so
you're going too far.
Continue though. So Charlotte wouldn't have got into the business without Reid.
She was a heck of an athlete. She was a great volleyball player.
Right.
And she really had no interest. I mean, her and Reid were really close, real buddies, more than brother and sister. They was really close. And I mean, his death hit everyone hard, and he had went over to New Japan. Reid was a really good, let's say, up and comer.
Yeah.
He hadn't made a name for himself yet, but he was trying to get into WWE, and Rick was trying to get him there too. And of course, Triple H was keep telling Rick, I can't. He's got to straighten up. The kid was he was a good wrestler. Right? Let me say that. But he hit Charlotte so hard, and she just dedicated her life to take Reid's place.
Andy, just imagine if Charlotte was just doing cameos and random appearances with Reid being in the spotlight, and we didn't have a Charlotte Flair. Arguably, we don't have a women's evolution in the women's division where we are today.
That's what I was going to say. Is because obviously she gets a lot of hate, but she is like the forefront of the women's division in WWE. She has to be.
And I'm not a Charlotte Mark, but I will say that she is the forefront of that division
because she has it all. I mean, obviously she's Ric Flair's daughter, but she has, and that was one of the biggest concerns when she started is she just going to be in the shadow of her dad for like the rest of her career? And she has obviously busted through her dad's shadow and become her own person. So the women's landscape would be so different. Obviously, you would still probably have Sasha and Bayley and Becky and Asuka, but it still wouldn't be the same without Charlotte. I mean, Charlotte is WWE. She is the women's division, and it would seem weird without her, and kind of something would still be missing without Charlotte.
Yep.
Well, there would never been the 4 horsewomen.
Right.
And NXT wouldn't have been, The four horsewomen,
you probably wouldn't have ended up with that Sasha Bailey match at TakeOver, both of them. I mean, you probably wouldn't end up with that. I still think you might have the four horsewomen, but it would have been Emma instead of Charlotte, and how big of a difference that would have been.
Oh my god!
Which, I mean, Emma in NXT was good, but she wasn't Charlotte, and that's kind of where the difference is, because you wouldn't have had those four women that were all like leagues above everybody else. Even on the main roster, they were leagues above everybody else.
Well, and the other thing to think about too, Dad, you mentioned it just a few minutes ago, is Charlotte's a Flair.
Yeah.
And Flairs dedicate their lives and themselves to whatever they're doing. So take Charlotte out of the equation. You could have replaced her with anybody, fill in the blank, but it doesn't live up to what Charlotte does. So yeah, you might have had the four horsewomen, but are they, because Charlotte elevated the rest of them.
Right.
So are they popular enough to even call themselves the four horsewomen?
Right.
Or, whatever. Obviously, the cream rises to the top, as the Macho Man likes to say. So Becky, Bailey, and Sasha. Yeah, I blanked for a minute. Thank you. Those three ladies would have eventually risen to the top, but would they have been given the platform that they had without Charlotte?
Right. And I mean, I don't want to leave out Paige here either, because Paige really, to me, Charlotte like elevated the women's evolution. I think Paige really started the women's evolution in some ways on the main roster. So I don't want to leave her out, because she deserves a lot of accolade and accomplishment and,
Absolutely.
a lot of the credit. But, I still think they would have probably given Paige the platform, but then not done anything else with it. But the fact that Ric Flair's daughter was a part of this, it elevated it so much so that they had to do something with it.
Right. Yep. I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I think Paige is right up there with Sasha.
Mm-hmm.
Not with Becky and Charlotte, though. But, Paige is Paige. She was really good. And when she first came and won the Divas title, they made a movie about her. I mean, but the thing about it is Charlotte packs the name Flair.
Yep.
That just elevates everything to another level.
Yep. And not just in the ring either.
No.
Out of the ring.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And that mainstream commercial appeal, you're not going to get that with any of those other ladies without Charlotte.
Nope.
That's for sure. All right. If you are just now checking us out, welcome to the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast, the show that is for the fans, by the fans. I am your phenomenal host, Mr. Podcasting, Chris Belcher. You can follow me at Chris Belcher 24 all over social media. The show is at PBW Podcast. We are streaming on SportsWire Radio every Monday and every Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. Make sure you check us out there, and replaying our shows just about every day. We thank Tom and the crew over there for their support. As you can see, I'm joined by my dad, Billy Belcher, for this old school, or ancient school, as you like to call it, this ancient school episode of the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast. Joining us for the first time on an old school episode is the indie darling, Mr. Andy York. And Andy, I'm going to throw out a what if. We're talking about the biggest what ifs in the world of professional wrestling, having fun fantasy booking and talking about the endless possibilities of what wrestling would be if some things had or had not happened. So, Andy, I'm going to throw one your way that I know you'll be passionate about, because you are the indie darling. So it kind of centers around an independent wrestler. I'm talking about AJ Styles. So back in 2001, the WWE purchased WCW. And what a lot of people might not know is that AJ Styles had a WCW contract when WCW was purchased. After the dust settled and all this other kind of stuff, AJ Styles was offered a WWE developmental contract, I think in early 2002, to come be in developmental. I think it was OVW at the time, that AJ had to move to Cincinnati and train in developmental, work on his character, but he would be under the WWE banner. Obviously, that didn't happen, because AJ Styles made a name for himself for 14 years and then came to WWE in 2016. But Andy, what happens if AJ Styles inks his name to WWE in 2002?
Well, the 2002 OVW class is a very interesting class by itself.
It is.
Because you have the likes of John Cena, Randy Orton, Batista, and Brock Lesnar in that class as well. So
you can't forget Shelton Benjamin.
And Shelton Benjamin. Right. But 4 of the biggest stars in WWE modern history right there in 2002. So I think AJ Styles coming up through that, I don't think he would be as big as he is now. And mainly because I don't think, especially at that time, they wouldn't have allowed him to be the style of wrestler that he really is and the style of wrestling that he works really well with. Which is really interesting because if we go back to our first one that we kind of talked about of like, what if Shawn went to WCW? If WCW was still around, you could have had AJ Styles come up through there, and I think he would have fit extremely well with that branded WCW style. But coming through this developmental, I think he would have very quickly got lost in the shuffle and probably ended up back in the independent scene and been able to do what he does to get probably to where he is still today. Which maybe or maybe not, because he may have a bad taste in his mouth with it. And, who knows what could happen if AJ Styles actually never came to WWE in 2016 either. So there's both kind of both sides of the spectrum. But to me, I really think he would have got lost in that shuffle and not really stood out because of the style of wrestling at that time.
Stand out. That's the key word, because I don't necessarily think he gets lost in the shuffle, because if you look at the landscape of WWE in that early Ruthless Aggression era, I'm talking 2002, 2003, they reintroduced the Cruiserweight title to try to capitalize on what WCW was doing. So they had Rey Mysterio, they had Chavo Guerrero, they had Billy Kidman, Jamie Noble, those kind of guys. So AJ could have worked in that division. However, I think it's the independent scene that shaped his character and his personality, and that's what's helped him shine in WWE today, even further beyond his ring skills. What do you think?
I think that his time in Impact was big. I think when he went to Impact, he sort of became his own man. I know he had, not fights, but him and management didn't get along at a certain point because of contracts.
Especially towards the end.
Especially toward the end. But when Sting got there, Sting raved how good AJ Styles was. He raved how good he was. And AJ become who he is in Impact. But if you watch Impact Wrestling, you watch AJ Styles wrestle, he was phenomenal then as he is now.
Well, I mean, and he was considered one of their homegrown talents. You had the guys like Christopher Daniels, Samoa Joe, Frankie Kazarian. What's the big guy? Abyss. You had guys like that and AJ Styles who they considered. I've listened to a lot of Jeff Jarrett's My World podcast. So shout out if anybody out there has not listened to that podcast. I'm telling you, they did 4 really in-depth episodes on the genesis of TNA, and to hear Jeff Jarrett talk about his concept in creating TNA, he talked about that, getting guys that would be the foundation of the company. And AJ was one of those guys. So if he never becomes the foundation of TNA, does he, like you said, Andy, does he get to WWE in 2016? I don't know. I lean towards what you said. Maybe he was in WWE for a while and had a bad taste in his mouth, and that would be that.
To me, I think his wrestling craft really came through in TNA. To me, his character work, though, really came through in New Japan. When he got to New Japan and Ring of Honor, I think his character development, when he was a part of the Bullet Club and when he was kind of doing all of these things and he was the leader of the group, obviously everybody knew who he was as a wrestler, but his character was kind of always up in the air. And I think with New Japan and with Ring of Honor, he was able to really craft his character, which that's one of my favorite things about Ring of Honor and New Japan is this where that's where those guys get to craft their character more than their wrestling. Look at somebody like Damian Priest. Damian Priest came from Ring of Honor, and I got to see him before he went to NXT, and he was the same character then as he is now. So it's just kind of where you craft your character while also being, some of the best wrestlers in the world. So I think that's where it kind of crafted it. So I think the TNA part was a massive part. Without the TNA, we wouldn't really have the AJ Styles we have today. But I think New Japan is also a big part of that.
Well, you look at other guys who were given that independent opportunity as well. Dad, you can chime in on this too. Look at guys like Adam Cole. who didn't change their character and is now, as big as he is. But that character was crafted on the independent scene. Samoa Joe, I mentioned him. I'm not sure about his character, but Seth Rollins, the guy jumped into NXT based on his independent reputation. So the independents are really the lifeblood of where this all thing started. And if you take that away from AJ Styles, I don't think he's as big as he is today.
Well, in WWE and the back of time when WCW was, of course, Vince run the show and Eric run the show.
Sure.
And it was, they controlled the reins and they said this, that, and other, but you got to do what we want you to do.
Yep.
So when you're in independence, the guys, the promoters and everybody that owns the companies, they give a lot of leniency to what wrestlers can do.
Yep.
And just like Andy said, AJ owned his character.
Yep.
Impact, then he went to New Japan. And Vince couldn't help but not sign him.
Yep.
But just think if WCW hadn't folded and AJ comes back maybe to WCW, or if he stayed at New Japan, AEW comes along.
Right.
Where does he go? He goes to AEW.
He's right there with them because those are some of his best buds.
Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely. All right. I know that's a huge rabbit hole. All of these are just big rabbit holes that we could go down for forever.
Well, my next one kind of piggybacks off of it a little.
Go for it. Go to your next.
Because my next one would be like, what if NXT didn't become more than a game show? How much would WWE change? Because I don't think we would have gotten a lot of these independent guys coming in. Honestly, I don't think we would have gotten a Sami Zayn or a Kevin Owens coming in because it was such a different NXT.
Right.
That's why I don't think we had any really big name independent guys other than Bryan Danielson, and we saw how long he stayed in there. It wasn't because of it's because he choked the guy on live TV, but I don't know how happy he would have been there. But if we had NXT like we do now and Bryan Danielson came through, how much more special would it be? So to me, I think NXT, if we didn't have an NXT like we do today, I think the independent scene would be so crazy and even more crazy than it is now. To give a company like if AEW did come around, their roster would be absolutely stacked because of that.
Yep. Well, you mentioned Kevin Owens. He has gone on record and said that when he was signed to NXT, they told him, don't expect to go to the main roster.
Yep.
Not going to happen.
Yeah,
you're going to be an NXT guy. And look, he was the second ever Universal Champion.
Yeah.
I know that title doesn't have a huge legacy right now, but for them to put the title on him for as long as they did, the guy shines, obviously.
And Finn Balor was the first ever Universal Champion. And like Seth Rollins, would Tyler Black have gone to NXT if NXT was what it was? Would John Moxley come through? Like there's so many questions of like, would these guys come through this independent scene or through this developmental brand that became its own, third brand really? Would people go through that if it wasn't there or if it was still this hokey game show?
Well, and Dad, weigh in on this because in the 90s, WWE, WWF at the time, had deals with other companies using them as their developmental territory.
Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
Smoky Mountain. You got your USWAs. You got even your ECWs.
WCCW.
Yeah, exactly. You got all of those kind of things that WWF was using as their feeder system. So if NXT as it is now didn't exist, and Andy was talking, the independent scene would be hot, WWE, I would assume, would continue that method. Wouldn't you think?
Yeah, they wouldn't go away from it. No, because Triple H took it over and made it what it is today.
Mm-hmm.
Back when the NXT started, I can remember watching it on Monday night, and I thought, oh, this is a joke.
Right.
It was just like the cheerleaders they had that was wrestling.
Goodness.
It was like the cheerleaders, and the NXT was a joke. But Bryan Danielson was a star in the making.
Yep.
He stood out above everybody else.
Yep.
So I think, it's NXT is good. It's really good. But all the big guys is gone from NXT now. Kevin Owens. Brian,
Finn Balor.
Finn Balor,
yeah.
Did not Kevin Owens beat John Cena on his first match?
Yeah, he did.
First match.
First
match, he beat John Cena. Kevin Owens is much overlooked in the WWE.
He is. Yep.
He definitely is. All right. Dad, you want to hit us with another one? Another what if in the world of wrestling?
Yeah, and
Oh no.
I'm gonna get morbid again.
Oh
And
gosh.
What if
My gosh.
What if Triple H didn't marry Stephanie and stayed with China? Would China be alive today?
Wow.
Wow. That got deep.
Would she have a different life? Triple H wouldn't be in the position he is in.
Triple H wouldn't be the COO of WWE.
No,
Let me tell you that.
No. And then that'd be a person. I mean, just as real life, it would be a person that didn't die. It was a sad.
Right.
I watched they did a documentary about her, and I don't know if you've seen it, Andy, or not. But her manager, her business manager, was him and her were doing a documentary when she died, and he talks through it most of the time. And the things that she went through, it's really sad, sad. Because she went to WWE and wanted to get into the Hall of Fame, and they turned her away at the door.
Yep.
Said, no, we are not going to talk to you.
Yep.
And that just sent her down, But if you think about it, it all goes back to her and Triple H was living. I mean, they were living together. Yeah, they were living together.
Yep.
And what if they stayed together and he not met Stephanie? How much would have changed the wrestling landscape now?
Well, I think Triple H would have still found his way somehow into the backstage role. It might not be COO, but the guy has been wrestling smart. He's been a student of the game, no pun intended, but pun intended, since he started. So the guy's a smart guy. And you don't just ride with Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and Shawn Michaels and not pick anything up.
Well, look at NXT, what he's done for it.
Exactly.
That proves exactly how good he is.
Okay. Yeah. So Andy, what if Triple H at that point, if China's still alive, Triple H breaks away and he starts his own promotion?
Yeah. I mean, we probably would have had an AEW before AEW came around in a lot of ways.
Exactly. Bingo.
And I'm not going to say either one would be better or worse. I just think it would kind of be the same model, to be real honest, because I think Triple H realizes especially in today's world, realizes the emphasis more on professional wrestling than necessarily sports entertainment.
Sure.
And so I think that's where his niche really would have been. So to me, it would have completely changed probably pro wrestling. It probably would have changed the industry then, but it completely would have changed everything that we know and love today.
I'm going to say this, and I'm going to try not to go down a rabbit hole with this because this statement could really change the whole direction of this podcast. But I think Triple H, to your exact point, understands the value of pro wrestling over sports entertainment because that's where the industry started. Yes, Vince made it entertainment and made it extremely popular, made it global, whatever. But Triple H realizes that sports entertainment wouldn't be where it is without professional wrestling. So I feel like his concept and his vision, especially for NXT, is to keep that basic fundamental concept so that you can raise up guys to be wrestlers when the entertainment side might not be valued as much anymore.
Well, I think, like you say, is NXT is like old school wrestling. They're going to go in to hurt somebody or kick somebody's butt. Yep. We're not going in it for the frills.
Sure.
Right.
There's no frills on NXT. I mean, you got a black fence, 10 foot high around the ring.
Right.
That makes it feel more like old style professional wrestling.
Sure.
There's no frills. There's no theme. There's no dolls. There's no.
Hey,
even like somebody like Karrion Kross. Like Karrion Kross was not as big with the NXT crowd as a lot of people probably thought he was. And a lot of that is due to like his character wasn't always the best. Now, obviously his character really progressed along, and towards before he went to the main roster, his character and his entrance was, like Adam Cole said, the thing that NXT gave him to stand out from everybody else, and it worked. Sure. But once you start to strip that away over, like we've seen over the last few weeks, I don't know if you saw the video going around of his send-off at NXT TakeOver 36. He was booed. I mean, he was booed, and there were hearty chants every 10 seconds.
Wow.
So I think I think you can see where like NXT does a really good job of pro wrestling and sports entertainment, because they really do go hand in hand. Like they shouldn't really be in competition with each other. If they're done right, they go hand in hand, because one's not valued more over the other. You kind of fit both together. And so I think that's what Triple H has done really well in NXT, is kind of marry the two together, to where like a Wyatt family in NXT was really, really cool, because they were really great. They were really good in the ring, but their character was really like interesting as well. So I think that's where he has really done a great job with NXT.
Right. I completely agree. All right. We are running short on time, so I want to throw one more at us before we sign off. I've got a really good one that I want to make sure that I get Dad's input in on here. I wrote this one specifically for him because I know that it's going to be a fun discussion. It's not bad. I'm not throwing shade at you. You're going to get
not like on the Sports Wire.
No, not like I did on the SummerSlam post show when I said you were very opinionated.
Yeah.
I said that because I knew you were listening.
He told everybody in the country and 10 other countries that I was opinionated.
I did, because I knew you were listening, and I knew you'd laugh at it.
I guess the apple don't fall too far from the tree.
That's exactly right.
Somebody else is opinionated too.
This is why I host a podcast, because I can say whatever I want. All right. As we wrap up here, I want to throw this one out, Dad. I'm going to throw to your opinion first. As we talked a lot, especially early on, about WCW, how that landscape would have changed if Hogan wasn't the third man, or if Shawn would have come, or yada, 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 what have you. And you said that Sting wouldn't have been the third man because he just couldn't be a heel. It would not have worked. It would have been shocking at first, but it probably wouldn't have worked. Well, let me throw another Sting scenario out to you. Okay. Sting finally showed up in WWE in 2014. Long time. He was the franchise. He's the only one to never have jump shipped besides Shawn Michaels, but he's the only one from the WCW side to have never jumped ship. But that was not without efforts by Vince McMahon and the WWF to get him there. Sting has gone on record and said, I believe it was around the time he tore his ACL, which would have been 1990, that was the closest he ever came to jumping ship and going to the WWF. So the question I'm going to pose is, what if in 1990, when Sting comes back from his ACL injury, what if he goes to the WWF instead of the WCW?
I think that Vince would have tried to bury him.
What?
In Sting's interview, when, like Chris is talking about, when he hurt his knee, and he talked about how close he was to coming to WWE. But then his last 2 or 3 sentences was, I just couldn't pull the trigger because I couldn't trust him. And to be honest with you, he come back, this little run he had with him, I don't think they did him right then.
Well,
you don't take one of the top 8 wrestlers in the world and you don't put him on a pedestal like Vince should have. But Vince didn't do that. He let him lose in WrestleMania to Triple H. Triple H ain't going nowhere. He's been around forever.
Now, wait a minute. That doesn't have anything to do with it.
Okay.
The point of Sting losing at WrestleMania, Sting wanted to lose at WrestleMania. He has said that was his only match and he was going out on his back. Yeah. And they were trying to build Triple H versus The Rock because they had that promo later in the show. That's another discussion, though. I think part of the reason that Sting didn't trust him, this is not confirmed. This is just, again, my opinion. This is my podcast. I can share it. My opinion is maybe, and this has not ever been publicized, but maybe some of the reason that Sting didn't trust them, maybe he was talking to Ultimate Warrior too much. Because, Warrior didn't trust him. And you know how Warrior was.
Yeah.
And
2 bricks shot of a load.
And who debuted together in the early 80s? Sting and the Ultimate Warrior.
But how long did that last?
I know it didn't last long. But what I'm saying is, what if they had contact after that? Well, what if they had stayed in contact? What if Warrior was feeding Sting a bunch of stuff about the WWE that may or may not have been true?
Well, anything that the Warrior could feed to anybody, including Sting, is bad information.
Exactly my point.
So you don't trust the Warrior. I wouldn't trust the Warrior to walk through. It's just, I'm not a fan at all.
I know.
But, Sting, I don't think he would have ever went to WWE. I just don't think he would. He just didn't trust Vince enough.
I think that Sting would have, and Andy, I'll throw to you after this. I know I'm going long here. I think Sting would have taken the place of the Ultimate Warrior. 1990, WrestleMania 6 rolls around. It's Hogan Warrior. Hogan's passing the torch to Warrior. What if it's Hogan Sting in 1990? You got Sting coming in. He's a jacked up dude, just like the Ultimate Warrior. He's got the face paint, just like the Ultimate Warrior. Obviously, he has the marketing and the fan appeal, like the Ultimate Warrior. But guess what? He can wrestle,
and he's smarter,
and he can wrestle. So to me, I think in the 90s, Vince would have seen that and would have at least given him one shot at the title in the 90s if he's passing the torch.
I agree with you. I think if he went at that time and Vince had the how Sting was, how popular he was, he would have given him a shot then.
I think so.
I can get I believe that too. But I think ultimately in the end, Sting just didn't connect. But he could have went, like Chris said, he would have replaced the Ultimate Warrior, and he would have done a lot better than the Ultimate Warrior did. Not ask for contract raises and demand this, demand that.
Right. Andy?
Yeah. I mean, to me, I've kind of told Chris this before. I've never actually gone back to watch a lot of Sting's old stuff. My first, this shows how young I am, which is, not a slap in the face to you guys, but my first initial time seeing Sting was the Joker Sting in TNA. That was like my first time ever seeing him. So I was kind of confused on what I was watching. Cause like I always have heard of Sting. And I'd seen like the face paint and all that stuff before. So I always thought that was kind of like who he was. But kind of going back and watch some of the 90s stuff, he wasn't really like that for like he was like he really developed his character. He really changed a lot throughout the years. So I don't really know. To me, I think both of you are probably right in a lot of ways because obviously with what we saw when Sting did come back, I think Sting did probably want to lose, but I think there was a lot of ego involved with Vince McMahon because, I'm sure everybody knows this. He doesn't have a big ego at all. And so I think his ego probably in the 90s wasn't as like, I don't want to say evil, but like as massive as it is now.
And I think that has to do a lot with him coming out on the positive end of the steroid trial in 93, because if he beat the federal government, the mighty Vince McMahon beat the federal government. So if Sting comes before that, maybe Vince is a little more receptive to him.
Yeah. I agree.
Because there's no Crow Sting. There's no Joker Sting. There's no none of that. So you still have a young enough Sting, Surfer Sting, that Vince sees money in, and he can run with however he wants.
Yep.
So then imagine the Sting matches that you have in 92, 93 with an up-and-comer named Shawn Michaels. You've got Bret Hart, who's coming into his prime. Sting and Mr. Perfect. Sting and, I don't know, his best friend, Lex Luger.
And Sting and Ric Flair again.
Sting and Ric Flair. Yep. I mean, the possibilities would have been endless. So I think, as much as, Andy, you hit the nail on the head about Vince's ego, as much as that probably would have been into play, gosh, it would have just been money. They would have been printing money with Sting.
Yeah.
They would have been printing money with Sting.
I will agree with that. That's a good concept. If he went and Vince would have accepted him and let him be who he was, he could have made a lot of money, just about as much as Hogan or
Warrior.
Well, he can make more than Warrior because, there's more to just running out there and jumping on the ropes and jumping up and down, doing the body, body flop,
Sting could wrestle.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's the difference. And Vince would have pushed Warrior even further if he could have wrestled, but he just couldn't wrestle.
And he wasn't
getting good matches.
He wasn't receptive to what people wanted him to do.
Exactly.
Yep.
And Sting, at the end of the day, is all about business. He's going to do what's best for business.
And you know how loyal he was to WCW. He would have been the same way to WWE.
Bingo.
The thing about Sting is he's a man of his word. You can trust what he says.
Yep. That's it. Don't get me started on Starrcade 97. All right. Listen, we have gone about an hour, so what I'm going to do is put a bow on this episode, and we are going to table this, and we're going to come back in a couple of weeks with part 2 of what ifs, because I know that Dad's got a couple more written down here. I know Andy's got a couple more written down here. I've got quite a bit more written down here that I know would be fun discussions. I'm talking about, and I'm not trying to get us into big discussions here. I'm talking about what if the 2001 invasion angle goes as it should have. I'm talking, what if John Cena had gotten fired in 2003?
Yes.
What if the curtain call never happens? All of these crazy things that we could sit here and talk about.
Yeah.
But I'm going to table this discussion. We're going to come back with part 2 of the biggest what ifs in professional wrestling. So make sure you keep it right here on Sports Wire Radio. We will let you know when that's going to drop. Make sure you follow us at PBW Podcast on all the major platforms. Hit that subscribe button wherever you find your audio podcast, and on YouTube. Make sure you do that so you can see our smiling faces. Make sure you tune in every Monday and every Thursday for myself, for Dad, Andy, Jared, all the great stuff that we have here on the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast. This is for the fans, by the fans. There's literally something for everybody. If you don't like what we're talking about today, guess what? Tune in Thursday. We're going to talk all about AEW All Out. CM Punk makes his long-awaited return to the ring. We're going to talk all about that this coming Thursday on the show. So make sure that you tune in. Dad, thank you for coming on.
You're welcome.
And enlightening me with this discussion. Anything else you want to add before we sign off?
Woo!
Oh, Lord. Mr. Ancient Skull. Andy, anything else you want to add, brother, before we sign off?
No, I'm good. This was a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to the next one.
Follow Andy at The Shandy Show on Twitter. He has his own podcast called The Shandy Show. They cover all things Marvel, DC, that whole universe. So if that's your bag, make sure you check him out wherever you find your audio podcast and on YouTube. I know he would appreciate that follow. And my dad is at Billy J Belcher 4 on Twitter. Make sure you give him a follow. I am at Chris Belcher 24. Again, the show is at PBW Podcast. This has been your old school edition, or ancient school edition, of the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Podcast. My name is Chris Belcher. Thank you so much for joining us. We will catch you guys down the road.